Hello and welcome to Mondays Among the Nations featuring Sasha Wilson. Thank you to those who are joining us today and those who are viewing this recording. It is so wonderful to see so many new and familiar faces. As always, I got to give a loving shout out to my amazing parents and a very special thank you to all of the presenters and speakers, especially today's guests, Sasha Wilson and Bulgarian Consulate General in New York, Dr. Angelov, who I am honored to introduce to you shortly. My name is Michael Mantell. I'm a psychotherapist, educator, and 3G, the grandchild of Holocaust survivors Alice Diamond from Satmar, Romania, and Mickey Mendelovich from Sighet, Romania. In my grandparents' memory and to combat Jew hatred and Holocaust denial and distortions, I began producing and promoting these programs. In October 2020, with the help of Andrea Bolender, I launched the Sundays with Survivors program, the first of which featured Holocaust survivor Irving Roth of blessed memory. Thank God we had such a successful program that I added more Holocaust education programs, including Mondays Among the Nations, 2G Tuesdays and 3G Thursdays, featuring non-Jewish allies and children and grandchildren of survivors. We've also added more programs that cultivate Jewish pride and allyship and combat Jew hatred. And I'm so grateful and proud to say that we're going over 4 years strong and counting. Now I have the honor to introduce our guests. Dr. Angelov is a senior diplomat and a scholar of international relations. Since 2022, he has been appointed by the Bulgarian government as the Consulate General in New York, covering 9 states in the northeastern United States. In 2023, he was elected as Vice President for Europe I and member of the Executive Board of the Society of Foreign Councils in New York. Before assuming his current position, among his many roles and services, Dr. Angelov headed the Middle East and North Africa Department at the Bulgarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and served in the permanent mission of Bulgaria to the United Nations in New York. His professional background also includes over 2 decades of university teaching in Europe and North America, training for diplomats, management of academic projects, and journalism. Sasha Wilson is a Bulgarian-American, LAMDA-trained actor, musician, and writer based in London. She founded Out of the Forest Theater in 2017 and has been creating historically driven work that is presented through a lens to better understand today's world. She has won numerous awards, including an Offie in 2019 and 2024 for Best Ensemble in Bury the Hatchet and The Brief Life and Mysterious Death of Boris III, King of Bulgaria, and the Broadway World Best Actress Award in 2018 for her performance as Juliet in Southwest Shakespeare Company's Romeo and Juliet. Sasha teaches workshop series in taking a historical idea from inspiration to draft, both online and in person, at Rose Bruford University. I'm so excited for you to meet our 2 special guests today and learn more about this incredible work of art and theater, The Brief Life and Mysterious Death of Boris III, King of Bulgaria. In May 2024, I had the great fortune of meeting Dr. Angelov and Sasha and seeing her outstanding performance in her incredible play. Throughout Sasha's presentation today, we invite you to write your comments or questions in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, we will open up the program for Q&A. No matter how incredible these programs are, and thank God they always are, your participation at the end of the program adds so much more value and meaning. At that time, please feel free to raise your virtual hand for me to see you and to call on you, or unmute yourself to ask your questions directly, or I can share your questions and comments that you wrote in the chat. You may ask your questions directly to both Sasha and or Dr. Angelov. And just 2 announcements before we begin. We have 2 wonderful programs in January and February that I hope you will save the date and join us for. On Sunday, January 19th from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, I am co-hosting an in-person documentary film screening and talkback at the Manhasset Cinemas in Manhasset, Long Island in New York in partnership with the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, the On the Map Foundation, and 3GNY. Colleyville is the critically acclaimed new feature documentary that delves into the heart-pounding 11-hour 2022 hostage crisis that rocked the quiet town of Colleyville when a seemingly ordinary Saturday morning, a terrorist stormed into Congregation Beth Israel during a live stream Shabbat service. The 80-minute documentary film screening will be followed by a talkback featuring Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker and Jeff Cohen, both hostages during the Colleyville hostage crisis, and the award-winning writer-director Danny Menken. The film and talkback offer an intimate look at the hostages' braveries and the community's unwavering support and explore the complexities of hate crimes, anti-Semitism, and the hostage crisis situation in a post-October 7th world. Our Sundays with Survivors featuring Marian Blumenthal Lizanne for International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which was scheduled for Sunday, January 26th, has been postponed due to a health issue, and we will let you know when that has been rescheduled. In the meantime, we hope you please join us on Sunday, February 2nd at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time for a special Sundays with Survivors featuring Hannah Cohen, a 32-year-old widow of Oriel Cohen, a soldier in the Givati unit who fell in Gaza in December 19, 2023. Hannah will be in conversation with Israeli educator, writer, and creator of the Heroes of October 7th project, Hadassah Ben Ari. As you can see, we have amazing, meaningful programs ahead in this new year, and I hope you can make it to one or all of them. With that, I'd like to thank you all once again for being here and your continued support of these programs. And again, thank and welcome the incredible Sasha Wilson and Bulgarian Consulate General, Dr. Angelov. Dr. Angelov, we would like to start off with you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. I'm not a native English speaker, so I'm still amused by the different idioms in English. And I particularly enjoy the one stating that there are many ways to skin a cat. Disclaimer, I'm a cat lover. I have one at home, like a family member. So there are indeed many ways to look at what is described at the announcement of today's events as one of the most meaningful rescues of Jewish life during the Second World War, the rescue of all of the Bulgarian Jews. There are many ways to look at that historic events. For example, the historians, they look at archives, interview survivors. They try to put together a full picture of this very dynamic and controversial time. There are the politicians and diplomats like me who are looking into that troublesome period. And so we try to highlight particular events, developments, which are going to help our nation stand out and make our citizens proud of their country. There are the human rights advocates who are looking into the social mobilization that led to the rescue of the Bulgarian Jews and try to get this as an inspiration for combating contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism. And apparently there is another way to look at the rescue of the Bulgarian Jews. And I encountered that way when, as Michael said last year in May, Sasha invited me to attend the presentation of her play at the E59 Theater in New York. And I'm aware that the historians, the politicians, or even the human rights advocates could find something to argue about and disagree. But I was generally impressed by the originality in the attempt to present to the general public, to reach the general public, and to share this very much unknown historical episodes. As a Bulgarian diplomat in New York, as Michael said, I was working in the permanent mission of Bulgaria to the UN for like 11 years in total, and now for more than 2 years as Consul General. I've took part in different events, particularly during the last year, 23 actually, to celebrate the rescue of all the Bulgarian Jews and to commemorate the tragic fate of the 11,343 Jews from parts of then Yugoslavia and northern Greece who were deported to the Nazi concentration camps. Those territories, while under temporary Bulgarian administration, were under the full and direct power of Germany, and the Jews living there were considered by Berlin to be under German jurisdiction. It is important to state that not a single Bulgarian Jew was deported to Nazi concentration camps or killed in Bulgaria. The entire Jewish community, at the time numbering around 50,000 people, survived the Holocaust. In fact, Bulgaria is considered to be the only country in Europe whose Jewish population actually grew naturally during the war. The Bulgarian state also facilitated the transit from Central Europe to Jews running from the Nazi terror. Bulgarian consulates, and I'm proud with that as a consul general, issued around 15,000 transit visas to Jews running from different countries through Bulgaria to eventually reach historic Palestine. Actually, many of them had the final leg of the journey on Bulgarian ships. Having said that, I have to acknowledge that every country has at least some regretful and painful memories from that historic period, and my country is no exception. Bulgaria, for one, under the influence of Nazi Germany, adopted anti-Jewish legislation. Though, because of the deeply rooted tolerance of the Bulgarian society, the Jewish population remained an integral part of it. Actually, the Nazi ambassador to Bulgaria, Adolf Beckerle, complained to Berlin about the mentality of the Bulgarian people, which lacks, I'm quoting, the ideological enlightenment that the Germans have. And in his cable to Berlin, the Nazi ambassador further explained, I'm quoting, the Bulgarian who was raised with Armenians, Greeks, and Gypsies doesn't see in the Jews any flaws justifying taking special measures against them. I'll conclude my brief remarks and join the Q&A afterwards by just stating that I'm really proud that the Bulgarian mentality apparently did not meet the Nazis' ideological standards. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opening remarks, Dr. Angelov. And Sasha, I'd love to welcome you to begin your presentation, and thank you all again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. I mean, this is just a real honor. It's been an incredible journey to be on with this story because I was raised Bulgarian. My mom's family is Bulgarian, and from the time that I was a small child, you know, we spoke Bulgarian at home, and my family was very proud of that identity, that side of, you know, that side of our identity. And it came as an incredible shock to me when in 2017, I was at a Thanksgiving dinner at my grandfather's house, and I discovered this book, The Crown of Thorns, on my grandfather's bookshelf. And as I was idly leafing through it, waiting for dinner to be served, I thought to myself, I've heard almost every single war story my grandparents have ever told, at least 1,000 times, but no one thought to mention that during World War II, these incredible events happened. And so it has become just something that I'm very, very excited to share with all of you and to share with the audiences that my theatre company reaches, the events. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I've got a little PowerPoint presentation with some images. So I've entitled this program Balkan Hope: How Nearly 50,000 Jewish Bulgarians Were Saved from Deportation During World War II. So I am a theater maker by trade. I trained as an actor after attending Georgetown University as a English and Russian double major. I went to London and trained as an actor. And in 2017, I founded a theater company called Out of the Forest Theater. And our whole premise is that we take misremembered and forgotten stories from history and we set them to live folk music in order to better understand today. So our very first show was called Bury the Hatchet, and it connected with my American roots. So it was all about Lizzie Borden, and it was set to murder ballads and old folk tunes from the 1800s. And the whole idea was that we were kind of going, okay, why are we fascinated by women in the media? And why is it that we think that we can determine guilt or innocence based off of these totally exterior factors? Did she cry too much? Did she cry too little? What did she wear? What did she do? And that show was a huge success. And we started out in a very kind of, by the exigencies of being recently graduated theater majors, we had next to no money, and we had some musical instruments and some costumes, and we went, okay, how do we create this world? And what we very swiftly discovered was we were interested in creating time and place through music and through what I like to call theatrical magic. So basically taking everyday objects and making them something else. So in that production, we had little bits of paper that became pigeons. You know, we tried to make different things become, we transmuted them in the theatrical space, and that was very exciting. And from there, our next production was called Call Me Fury, and it was about the Salem witch trials and witch trials more generally, but told exclusively through the female perspective. Because as a student of literature and as a theater lover, it struck me as deeply interesting that the most famous presentation of the Salem witch trials was obviously The Crucible, and it is notably told with a male protagonist, which I found to be unsatisfying. So I gathered old court documents from the 17th century, 17th century colonial Massachusetts, and I created this piece of theater, and we started to build this theatrical skeleton where we went, okay, all of our shows contain this sort of musical skeleton, and obviously they're about the past, but they're about the past in a way that allows us to keep politics at hand's length so that we can actually talk about it, you know, because I don't know how all of you feel. I grew up in Boston, by the way, but what I found really interesting, and perhaps the British are much more reserved than the Americans, but I found very interesting that if you tried to bring up politics or these sorts of issues directly, there was a squeamishness or a disinclination to engage in the topic, because it was, oh, we didn't talk about that. So I went, okay, well, we'll talk about history, which everyone loves. And by doing that, we made these issues present and immediate. And so when I went to my grandfather's house, there he is. This is him, a photo of him from the summer of 1940. And I found Crown of Thorns on his bookshelf. And I had spent my lifetime hearing these war stories, how my grandparents met, how my omama fled and did this peripatetic journey around all of Europe, only to meet my grandfather in an internment camp in northern Italy, where they had a beautiful love affair and decided to get married and emigrate to the United States. There she is. That's Charlotte Verosta. They shared all of those stories, but never the story of Boris III and what happened. I went, this is exactly the sort of thing that my theatre company needs to sink its teeth into. Because I have always felt very strongly that Bulgaria has been this forgotten corner of history. Whenever I told people where I was from, they'd be like, oh, yeah. Oh, Hungary. Yeah, I went there one time. And I'd be like, well, it rhymes. It's not the same. Or they'd say, oh, I went skiing, or I went to the Black Sea. And that was the extent of it. And so it became very, very urgent for me to tell this story. And so with my grandfather's wisdom and my love of history, I decided to embark on the research of this episode, which on the surface sounds like a straightforward, the goodies triumphed over evil, and here we are. And very, very swiftly, I discovered that the history is much more thorny, much more complicated than it seems on face value. So where we begin is actually just before World War II. So just before World War II, we have a Bulgaria that is deeply pastoral. It is not an economic powerhouse. It is not a political force on the European scale. It is crippled from a loss from World War I. And it's teetering right on the edge of the European map. So it's stunning. It's the place of it. There's a wonderful region in the middle of the country called the Valley of the Roses, and when the roses bloom, it's the most incredible place to be. There's music, there's culture. The country itself, it dates back to, the cradle of civilization. So there are if you go down sort of into the middle of the country, just south of the Rhodope Mountains, there are these incredible archaeological sites where they're unearthing old ruins from thousands of years ago, and it's extraordinary. It's always been this intersection of East and West. And what's really notable for this platform and for this discussion is that there has been a Jewish presence in Bulgaria. And in fact, Bulgaria, generally, this region has been a melting pot since the time of, the Romans. Jewish people first came to Bulgaria in the 1st century under the Romans in 293. The Byzantine Empire, after Rome and after the Great Schism and the Roman Empire split into East and West, we have this Byzantine Empire, and there was a Jewish population in Bulgaria from that time. So we're talking thousands of years. We know that in the Second Bulgarian Kingdom, one of the queens of Bulgaria, her name was Theodora. She was Jewish. So a king of Bulgaria married a Jewish woman, and she became queen. In 1376, we get an influx of Bulgarians from Hungary. In 1470, there is an influx of Jewish people from Bavaria, and these are both Ashkenazi strains. And then, notably in 1492 from Spain and 1496 from Portugal, we get the bulk of the Sephardi Jewish influx from those two nations. And notably, throughout that entire time, Bulgaria has been deeply, deeply, deeply multicultural. What is also really important to note, I think, is that Bulgaria was under the Ottoman yoke, under Ottoman occupation for hundreds of years. And I believe that is the reason why we see this great leveling, you know, because all of these very rural communities live together. You can hear tracts of people saying, okay, well, you know, even from my grandfather's time, you would hear people saying, well, you know, I attended Jewish services on the Friday, and then the Jewish families would come to the, you know, Orthodox services then on the next day. And there were all of these cross meldings of tradition, because it was these tiny, tiny little village communities, and everyone lived side by side, and they understood one another to be brothers and sisters and Bulgarians, first of all. So this religious variety was just part of the fabric of the country, and that was beloved and part of its identity. When I went traveling in Bulgaria in July, I was going through the Rhodope Mountains, and I stayed with this man who ran a hostel. I mean, to call it a hostel is to... It was his house. And we had been taken under the wing of this elderly couple that had been living in the village for ages. They sort of took us around and they showed us all the sights. And then we sat with him in his kitchen, and he, you know, was recounting stories of the village. And it kind of, the night fell, and all of a sudden we heard this incredible sound, and it was the call to prayer. So just in the next village over, there was a Muslim temple, and there was the call to prayer. And he went, oh yes, you know, in the 80s, you know, there was this forced assimilation, but, you know, people came to the village, and they, you know, they went, who here isn't Orthodox? And all of us just stood in a line, and they went, we don't know what you're talking about. Because there was this sense that anyone who had grown up in this village, they were all together. And I found that really, really moving. It has always struck me whenever I visited, because I used to spend my summers in Bulgaria. These villages are very tight-knit communities. You're looking at, you know, to this day, some of them will be like 50 people strong. And they're agrarian, and they're fighting against the elements, and they're very small communities, and people understand one another. And it strikes me, having grown up in the West, that this is a very, very different outlook to difference and like multiculturalism. You know, it just struck me as being really profound that you can have your different beliefs, and it's really celebrated because you're all part of this one same small community that's just trying to survive against the elements, that's just trying to survive against, you know, the Ottoman overlords in the 1500s or what have you. And so all of this gives you sort of a backdrop of what the history of Bulgaria up until the 20th century was. So there was this big war of independence. I'm really breezing through this now. There was a big war of independence. The Russians helped the Bulgarians overthrow the Ottomans at the very end of the 19th century. And then in the 20th century, they were a independent country, and they were casting around for a monarch. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. But what is extremely notable to me is that in 1909, the Sofia Synagogue was built. Once upon a time, there were 7 synagogues in Sofia. Now only the one remains, and I visited it in July, and it was just such an incredible experience. But what was notable, Maxim Delchev, who was the director of the Shalom organization, he spoke to us, and he remarked that that the existence of this sort of Jewish construction at the time is profound, because there is a history of traveling light. You have your musical instruments, you have the things that you can take, but the existence of this building site and the existence of building the synagogue in 1909 is that an indication that there was a degree of security and stability of this Jewish community within Bulgaria, and it was part of the fabric. Again, within that sort of triangle of Sofia, there were you can see it still to this day. There is the synagogue. There's an old mosque, and there's the oldest cathedral, the Sveta Nedelya Cathedral, all within like a little triangle, just in the dead center of Sofia. So for hundreds of years, this has been a profoundly multicultural place. And so there we are, poised at the beginning of the 20th century. And as I said, Bulgaria is a predominantly agricultural society. There are a few centers of bigger cities like Sofia. We also have Plovdiv. We've got some. There's a great synagogue in Plovdiv as well, and a history of the Jewish community there that's really quite astonishing. But by and large, you're looking at very small villages that are not connected to the fabric of the rest of Europe in the way that you might see more towards the West. And so here we are. This is a photograph of the Sofia Synagogue on the right, and on the left, this is a graphic from this incredible book called The Last Jews of Eastern Europe by Brian Blue and Yael Strom. It's an incredible resource. There's some really beautiful photographs in there. And what you see here is the prayer, but transliterated into Bulgarian text, which is just stunning. So I'm just going to scroll down now. And so, right. So the play that I wrote with my partner, The Brief Life and Mysterious Death of Boris III, King of Bulgaria, which I co-wrote, centers around this man here on the left, Boris III. He was the King of Bulgaria during this period. This is his wife, Giovanna, and here she is again. She was Italian. This is his son, Simeon. And his daughter, Maria Luisa. And so where we find ourselves at the very beginning of the 20th century is that Boris's father, Ferdinand I, he was a German prince. Yes, here we go, the next slide. Ferdinand was a German prince. When Bulgaria finally got its independence from the Ottomans and became its own country, they had the very tricky task of deciding how they were going to govern themselves. After 500 years of Ottoman rule, the original Bulgarian royal family had been lost, and there was this clamor to regain a royal family. So they went around Europe, and they tried to find a prince that wasn't busy running some other place to step in and do the job. And they managed to find Ferdinand. And Ferdinand was a very fascinating character. So he was part of all of the royals are all related to each other, just by the way. So Boris was related to Queen Victoria. His cousin, Tsar Nicholas, they were related, the Tsar of Russia at the time, which means that also he was related to George, who was the King of England during the very beginning of World War II, and just prior. And so when they were casting around to try and find somebody to run the country, they they found Ferdinand because he was looking for a job, and he agreed to step up to the throne, and he became Ferdinand I of all Bulgaria. What became slightly tricky was that Ferdinand sided with Germany in World War I, and after the loss of the Axis powers during World War I, he was really ashamed of his failings, and so he abdicated. And at a very tender young age, Boris III ascended to the throne. The very beginning of his reign was troubled by assassination attempts and a lot of very complicated politics, and fundamentally he was a bit not unsuited to ruling, but he was a soft person. He was a family man. He was he cared about doing the right thing. He was not avaricious in his leadership qualities. And I think from my research, I would say there was a sense that there was a degree to which he wished it hadn't fallen to him quite so soon. And so after World War I and after the abdication of his father, he assumes the throne. And that's when things start to get quite complicated. So what we do in our play is we rattle through all of this history very, very rapidly, with some songs and some multi-rolling. And we try and get you up to speed so that we deposit you in the early 1940s. And so basically where Bulgaria finds itself at the beginning of World War II is it has been really struck by the losses of World War I. It doesn't have any sort of military strength. It's down on the bottom left-hand corner of the European map, and the German forces are rapidly approaching. Germany has sort of swept across Europe in this tidal wave, and this country with very little strength, very little power to stand up for themselves is looking down the barrel of a very, very difficult choice. And so what we do at the beginning of our show is we try and explain how Bulgaria came to side with the German forces at the beginning of World War II. The trouble is that though it would be fair to say that the Bulgarian people are not in any way anti-Semitic at this time, you have a German army sort of standing in between Bulgaria and the Allied forces, rapidly encroaching, and Boris makes the terrible decision that he goes, okay, well, I've seen what's happened to everybody else. We're less equipped to deal with this coming onslaught than the other countries that we've seen crumble under Adolf's incursion. So what I will do is I will side with him. Of course, what I will say in this is we have had to construct as a theater company a narrative that makes sense of the individual pieces of the timeline. So what we know to be a fact is that we know that Bulgaria sided with the Axis. We know that they didn't deploy forces to fight on the front line. We then know that there was this tension around these other territories. So basically, one of the big criteria that Bulgaria was anxious about was that after World War I, they lost the territories at the fringes of the country. So to the left, where former Yugoslavia used to be, and then Greece, was Macedonia and Thrace. Thrace and Macedonia were the two territories to the east and the south that Bulgaria lost after World War I. And then Dobruja, which was part of Romania, was another territory that they lost just to the top of the country. And one of the political desires of the government was that those territories were regained. And what became very clear very quickly was that the German forces were willing to return those territories to Bulgaria if they sided with them in the conflict. And so part of Boris's strategy at the time was to ally with Germany to not get invaded, to get those territories back, and hopefully just spin out all of the rising anti-Semitic legislation and all of those parts of the Nazi regime that he hoped that he could just sort of tacitly agree to, but not actually enforce. And this was a terrible risk that he ran. But he we believe from our research that it was one of those choices where it was a lesser of two evils. It was either let the country be overrun or side with the Axis and just try and delay as long as possible. What is interesting to note at the time is that so Bulgaria sides with Germany at the very beginning of World War I, 1941. They then very swiftly return Thrace and Macedonia to Bulgaria. Southern Dobruja is returned to Bulgaria, but what is important to note at that time is that Thrace and Macedonia were occupied by German troops, and they were under German legislation. And some Bulgarian troops were sent over to manage those territories, but they wouldn't actually be returned to Bulgaria until after the war. So what very swiftly starts to happen is that Germany puts pressure on Bulgaria to put its money where its mouth is. So they go, well, we've returned you these territories. Now we want you to, enact some of our policies. They were then under the prime ministership of Bogdan Filov, just over here on the left. Bogdan Filov was Nazi sympathizing. He was a fascist. He very swiftly, with the aid of Alexander Belev over here, established the Commissariat for Jewish Questions. This started to unroll this anti-Jewish legislation across Bulgaria. Jewish Bulgarians at the time were forbidden then from running cinemas, from joining the army, from becoming accountants, from doing all sorts of work. They were confined to very specific parts of Sofia or to the different regions in which they lived. There were curfews that were enacted. It was very, very swiftly becoming this oppressive and dangerous atmosphere in the country. And Alexander Belev was a part of this group called the Rotniks, and the Rotniks were a fascist, quite violent organization. There were instances where the Rotniks would break the windows of Jewish stores and terrorize them generally. And he, though he was a lawyer, then started running this organization, the Commissariat for Jewish Questions, with the aid of his secretary, Liliana Panitsa, who's pictured here. So Liliana Panitsa, she was a young woman in her 20s who was having an affair with Belev. We know this because she testified after the Soviets invaded in 1945. There was a show trial, and she was put on trial, and she testified saying that they had this affair, that she was in love with him. But all the while, she was secreting documents out of the commissariat and passing them on to members of the Jewish resistance. So we know that there were a couple named Buko and Anka Lazarov in Kustendil, which is a town outside of Sofia, sort of a little more than a suburb, sort of a small town outside. And information was passed to them that Alexander Belev was organizing a deportation of the Jewish population from that region. And she ran around town sharing all of this, going, you must know this, you can't be there when the call comes. Everything has to be, we have to organize ourselves, we have to do something to prevent this. Buko and Anka Lazarov, they throw a party at a tobacco factory in Kustendil. And under the guise of this party, they brought together all of the members of the Jewish community there and rallied and said, something must be done. We have to do something to stop this. And it wasn't just Jewish people that came. It was members of the Bulgarian community more widely. And very swiftly, what transpired was that a delegation was drummed up. So the delegation was headed up by 44 members. And one of them was Dimitar Peshev, who's this man just here. He was a member of the Bulgarian parliament. And they all decided that what they were going to do was they were not going to stand for this. There was no way that members of their community, people they knew, people they'd grown up with, there was no way that they were going to allow this deportation to take place. So they organized a delegation of 44 people to go to speak to Filov and try and stop the deportation from happening. Of course, the Commissariat for Jewish Questions interceded and bullied and intimidated all of the members of this delegation, except for 4 people who wound up going to Sofia and meeting with the ruling party. So there was also a man called Peter Gabrovsky, who served with Alexander Belev and Filov, and they met with him and they said, look, we can't allow this. Something has to be done. We must stop this deportation from happening. And news came back that an order was sent from the highest place, essentially saying that the king had been informed of this and he was canceling the deportation. Unfortunately, that deportation was only cancelled from within the boundaries of what was old Bulgaria. So from the territories of Macedonia and Thrace, which were to the east and the south, the west and the south of Bulgaria, what is now former Yugoslavia and Greece, those territories, tragically, the 11,343 people from those regions were unfortunately deported to Treblinka, and all but 12 perished there. This is when Metropolitan Stefan, one of the heads of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, comes to the fore. So he was present. He went to Lom, which is a town along the river to the north and the west of Bulgaria, and he saw the deportation taking place, and he speaks very vividly in his diary of what he witnessed there. And he stands up and he says, I'm not going to allow this. We will do everything that we can to help our brothers and sisters and stop this. So Metropolitan Stefan, not only does he and the rest of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church embark on this incredible mission to convert a load of Jewish people to Christianity in these in the aims of saving them from recognition from the Nazi forces. But he also shelters Jewish families within the monasteries so that they're beyond the reach of deportation. So this man over here on the right is Theodor Dannecker. He was a Nazi who was sent from Berlin to oversee all of these deportations. He was 27 at the time of these events, and he'd already orchestrated the deportations of thousands of Jewish people from Paris. And there was this enormous conflict where Metropolitan Stefan confronted the forces of the commissariat and said, we will stand with our brothers and sisters, and if it takes me lying down in front of a train, that is what I'm going to do. So all the while, what happens in Bulgaria are these minor acts of you'll see people going. There was an incredible account of this one man who hid all of these, hid a whole family of Jewish people underneath his bakery. And another account of this woman who threw these baked potatoes into one of the. There was a school that had been converted into a assembly point for Jewish deportation, and so she, from her window, threw these baked potatoes into this what was a schoolyard, and it was just, you hear account after account after account of everyday Bulgarians saying, absolutely not on my watch. This is not what our country stands for. This is not what we identify with. These are not the values of our society. And all the while this is happening, King Boris has been slightly dodging accountability. So every time somebody's been trying to get him to sign something, or somebody has been trying to get him to put his foot down and complete these deportations, he's been off hiking, or he's made himself scarce. And so the narrative has become Boris very deliberately was trying to delay and delay and delay and delay, so that though he sided with the Nazi regime, he would be able to control everything so that actually none of his people were deported from within the bounds of Bulgaria. And so it's this bitter pill where the delaying wasn't able to save those people from Macedonia and Thrace, but the deportation from Kustendil is thwarted in March of 1943. And Hitler is furious. Hitler's absolutely furious, and the war is starting to go very badly for the Axis powers. They're being thrust back from the Eastern Front, and things are going extremely poorly. And all of a sudden, King Boris III is summoned to the Eagle's Nest. So he's summoned to see Hitler himself. And he's desperate not to go. In fact, Boris III was invited to come on Friday the 13th. He says, I refuse. I'm not flying anywhere on Friday the 13th. It's not happening. But he's not able to delay for too long. And so despite his best attempts at trying to just avoid the Führer's call, on the 14th of August, 1943, he heads up to see Hitler, and there is an extremely heated conversation. We don't actually know what was said within that session. There was no transcript of their conversation, unfortunately. But guards outside that room say that they overheard Hitler shouting at Boris for the better part of 45 minutes. Boris then exits looking profoundly, profoundly unwell and heads back to Sofia. And he carries on meetings, he carries on running the government until the 28th of August, 1943, when he dies of a heart attack. Now, there's a great deal of uncertainty and intrigue around whether or not Boris was poisoned by the Nazis, whether or not there was a feeling that the Soviets were involved, actually. Perhaps the stress got to be too much and he was caught in the middle. We simply don't know. But not long after Boris's death, the Soviets, who used to be Bulgaria's allies, invade. They take over the country. They hold show trials. They summarily execute most of the people that were running the country at the time, and including Bogdan Filov, the prime minister. He is executed. Even Liliana Panica, who was working for the resistance, she was interrogated brutally by the secret police. And unfortunately, though she was acquitted of all charges, she dies not long thereafter. Boris's son, Simeon, who briefly ascended to the throne after Boris's death, he was being guided by a regency, basically. Boris's brother Kirill and some other cabinet members were running the government. They were all executed, and Simeon and his mother and sister Maria Louisa were exiled, and the monarchy was dissolved. And we find ourselves in this aftermath of World War II, where nearly 50,000 Jewish families were saved from deportation, but the tumultuous period nevertheless took its toll. During that time, they saw riots, they saw their livelihoods being taken away, they had their radios confiscated, they were subjugated to untold cruelties, like, for example, being put to work on details to build roads in the regions. Some speculate that that was done in an effort to save them specifically from deportation. Others argue, no, this is an example of Bulgaria enacting anti-Semitic legislation against these Jewish population. But nevertheless, in the aftermath of World War II, almost all of the Jewish population in Bulgaria emigrates to Israel, to Jaffa. For many years, Jaffa is known as Little Bulgaria. And there was a time when signs were written in both Cyrillic and in Hebrew. And you have this feeling that, you know, despite everything that was achieved, despite this rescue that managed to be executed, that, you know, somehow there's no turning back. There's no forgetting that all that violence happened. There's no forgetting that there was this hostile incursion to what was heretofore an extremely peaceful, pastoral, loving community. And so the Jewish population of Bulgaria here, this is another image from the Last Jews of Eastern Europe. So most of these families emigrated to Israel, and what you're looking at here is some Jewish people playing backgammon, or tabla, as it's called. My grandfather taught me how to play it, and this is like as Bulgarian as it comes, right? And to this day, there is a small but strong Jewish population in Sofia. The synagogue still exists. I was there. Like I said, I met Maxim Delchev, and it's still running. And this is a woman exiting through the front door of that synagogue. So though most of the population left for Israel after the war, there's still Balkan Hope. There's still a multiculturalism there in Bulgaria. And it's a complex story, but a touching one, I think. And yes, this is me and my writing partner, Joseph Cullen, and this is our theatre company, Out of the Forest Theatre, where if you are interested, there is a link to all of the research materials that we used to write the play. And yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Sasha. I just want to first ask a couple of questions. There's one that somebody who is attending asks, also Galia, and I think it's a great question. How much of this chapter of Bulgarian history has been taught in Bulgarian schools, either past or present?
So my understanding is that during the Soviet period, this was not widely shared. All of the documents, or most of them, were sealed and sent to Moscow. Because, you know, for better or for worse, the Soviet regime was not that interested in uplifting stories of rulers, or indeed the church doing things that were valuable to the community for their own propagandistic reasons. But I think after the fall of communism, it has come out in bits and bobs more. What from my understanding, I attended a seminar in July with the Olga Lengyel Institute at the American University in Bulgaria. And what I understand is that there's like quite a lot of information and quite a lot of pride around the delegates that stopped that deportation in Kyustendil, but that it's not nearly as widely known as it ought to be, even to this day. So yeah.
First, Sasha, thank you for the very passionate talk, and I was really interested to hear your take on that, and I really appreciate it. A few words in the play. You do an amazing job to translate a very complicated story to the general public. I was impressed at that time by the 360-degree you presented to this immersive view. Indeed, it's a very complicated time, and you know, in fairy tales we used to think about the good and the evil. Reality is much more complex, and as Sasha was hinting, nowadays we have the privilege to look back, and we could figure out far many more things. At that time, the situation looked really complicated, and in the play they show this very well. But for example, probably one of the reasons the king at the time, Tsar Boris, decided to finally become an ally with Germany. And Sasha gave a couple of reasons. Another one was that otherwise Bulgaria was going to be made to send troops to fight against the Soviet Union. And everybody who is familiar with the Second World War knows that what happened with the German troops that entered the Soviet Union, the slaughter. And at that time, Bulgaria was indeed a small country. So should the Bulgarian troops have been sent to fight there, Bulgaria was going to be a nation of widows, no doubt about that. I mean, definitely from the perspective nowadays, I don't want to justify joining in alliance with Germany, but just adding to what Sasha was saying, the reasons for things that happen. And in the play, they show all of this controversy and how difficult for Boris was to take sides on this. On the question of Galina about the history books, I just want to add to what Sasha was saying. Indeed, it was during communism. I was at that time, I was born in 1976, so I had some experience. I was 14 when the Cold War was over, and at the time we didn't study anything about the rescue of the Bulgarian Jews, literally anything. It was only in the 90s, and I would say even in the late 90s, when we started reading and hearing about the rescue of the 50,000 Bulgarian Jews. So what was the reason? Sasha hinted, and I agree with what she said. I would further add, so at the end of the Second World War, when Tsar Boris was killed or died, his very young child, I think he was like 6-year-old or something like that, Simeon, he became Tsar. And then soon afterwards, the Soviet army invaded Bulgaria, even though by that time Bulgaria withdrew from the war, declared war to Germany. It was used as an excuse for the Soviet forces to occupy Bulgaria and to put a communist government. So once this communist government started running the country for almost half a century, they didn't want to recognize that anything done by the previous regime, which they toppled, was good. And saving 50,000 Bulgarian citizens of Jewish descent was just going to be something good for the previous regime, and they didn't want anything like that. And also, as Sasha said, the role of the church was very critical for the social mobilization in Bulgaria to organize to prevent the deportation. And the communist regime was very anti-religious. I mean, at least religion was not banned in Bulgaria. In Albania, it was banned. It was the first officially atheistic country. Bulgaria was still an Orthodox Christian country, but religion was not really allowed to enter different spaces. The grandparents could go to church, but they were pretty much discouraged to bring the kids, the grandchildren to church. So that was another reason the communist regime didn't allow the students to learn about the rescue of the Bulgarian Jews, because it was going to give credit to the former monarch, to the church. Nowadays, we know much more. I passed the education system long time ago, but I know that kids in Bulgaria study this. We put more and more about that period in our curriculums, but actually we put also a lot of focus on combating anti-Semitism. Like 2 years ago, Bulgaria adopted the first national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. I was one of the people involved in the process. I was in the working group. So now in our school program, we put information about the rescue of the Bulgarian Jews, but also a lot of information about how to recognize this type of threats, how to counter them. So it's a complex thing. It's not only about history, it's also about prevention and fighting contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Thank you both for answering that very comprehensively. So just to go back to the play a little, I want to say a few things first. I've said this, Sasha, to you before. I'm utterly amazed by what you put together, both the play itself and then your performance. It's absolutely amazing. Hopefully everyone will have a chance to see it, because it really cannot be missed. This is not only a story that is very unknown, but I think those who tell it cannot tell it in the way that you have. I mentioned to you that I'm an avid theater goer, and there's 3 ways that I look at theater: if it's innovative, if it's educational, and or if it's entertaining. And a lot of theater misses one or all of those. And you hit the mark and raised the bar on so much of that and this is such an important part now, I think, of Holocaust education. That's how I see it as well. And it is a very tricky story to tell, like both of you mentioned, because of the history. So just one thing that I want to note, in the play itself, there's a line that says, "No story is ever quite as simple as that, least of all this one." And I think that is such an important line to mention because, number one, Boris, the King of Bulgaria, Boris III, he is the protagonist in this play. So a question that I have is, choosing Boris to be the protagonist, what led to that decision? And also, what were the sources that you used? Because a lot of the information, like you said in the play, is possibly unknown, like the meeting with Hitler, what happened behind there. And it's a mysterious death. We don't know, was there poison? I think people said that it could have been. Was it a heart attack, stress, etc.? So number one, just kudos for taking on this difficult task. And then also back to the question, what were your sources, and then what led you to choose Boris as the protagonist?
Well, Boris, I think Boris was always going to be the protagonist from the very first. If only for the reason that specifically British audiences have a very particular lens through which they view history, which is male-centric, which is through great men, kings, prime ministers, and what we thought was interesting and challenging to the narrative is taking us in through this guy who is thrust into the situation that he's actually quite unprepared to handle, watching him struggle with it, and then realizing he never would have done it had it not been for all of these other people. So it was kind of, for us, a dramatic bait and switch. That was very satisfying. And also because to a certain degree, there are just limitations in theater, like we have to have somebody to guide us through this world. And it's very structurally difficult to give this kaleidoscopic narrative its due without it impacting one person. And because we knew that the great crux of this was going to be his meeting with Hitler, we thought, well, he has to be the protagonist, really. And he has to go through this nadir of the soul where he realizes that his actions are the reason why 11,343 people died, that he then finds his spine and goes, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to do the right thing. So it becomes a very understandable and digestible theatrical journey if it's told through his lens. So that was why we told it, because and also then secretly slightly a little bit because when we first wrote it, Boris was the prime minister, so we got a lot of people like bought tickets because they were like, oh, it's about it was a fun chime at the time.
And so a lot of the intentions and reasons behind certain things are unknown, I assume, right? We're still not clear of the reason for Boris potentially or possibly standing up. I don't know if that's how known that is. So that's more my question is what's known, and do we know these intentions?
Right. So it's deeply complicated, of course. We unfortunately don't have Boris's diaries, so we can't say. What we do have is we do have a lot of letters that he wrote to family. And we have a lot of things that, seem quite incriminating. There was a letter that he wrote to his sister Evdokia that said, this was after he met with Hitler, and it was something along the lines of, I've done it now, but I'm going to pay, and things where you kind of go like, oh, but of course we're reconstructing through scant documentation. And again, there are agendas, right? So like, I'm sure the royal family are all lovely. I've met a lot of them. But it is fair to say that this is a man who sided with a fascist government in the 1940s and worked with fascists, and, you know, his country enacted fascist legislation. So, like, I can't tell you on a personal level, like, how aligned he was with his decision making. I will say that we know, again, through anecdotal evidence, not through anything documented, that he would go into villages and he would, like, meet people, and he was a man of the people, and he wanted to be seen as, he wanted to be part of the fabric of Bulgaria. That meant a lot to him. But how do you construct a life? You know, like, it's a very delicate balance to be striking. So, because there are many people who go, no, he was a dreadful fascist, evil person who sided with Hitler, who didn't care about the Jewish population, who was this. And then there are people who go, no, but look, like, he stopped the deportation, he did X, Y, and Z. And then other people who say, well, no, he sent people to labor camps. So it's like, you can take any one fact and you can, and this is what I think is so fascinating about history, is that facts are never facts. They're always malleable. They're always presented through a point of view. Like, when you read a history textbook, even what is included or not included influences our narrative. There is no empirical truth to a certain degree. And so, yeah, like I said earlier, we had to try and recreate a psychology of a human being based off of, we know Bulgaria sided with Nazi Germany. We know there was supposed to be this deportation. We know that was canceled. We know that, you know, like, you can pin these main markers and you kind of have to go, right, well, how do we trace this psychological journey? And the answer is a lot of that is just, you know, unknowable, but we have people's secondhand accounts that we've reconstructed. So, like I said, if you go to outoftheforesttheater.com, there is a link to our program notes, and in the link there's a bibliography. So if you really want to tread all this historical ground, you can read all those books as well, because they're quite polarized. So we've had to kind of synthesize all of that.
Yeah, you did a remarkable job, and those extra notes in the play text is very incredible. And you put these little nuggets of this actually happened. So you're adding these little bits and pieces.
I love the footnote.
It was very helpful to know that maybe he, I forgot who was eating extra dessert. Was it?
Hitler, yeah.
There was this line. It was very fascinating. I think also in the footnotes, I see that you gave homage to your grandparents in the text as well. Can you share a little bit about how they, in a sense, appear?
Yeah. So when Simeon was born, so this is Boris's son, extra marks were given to all of the school children in the period to be like, yay, the new royal has come onto the scene. And my grandfather at the time was failing high school. But because he got the extra marks, he graduated, and yeah, so he wound up going to university and wound up going to America, and that's why I'm here.
You had a cast of, was it five, and they were playing a lot of different parts, right? It wasn't just one person playing one role. So how did that work? I'm sorry?
Except for Boris. So the actor playing Boris only plays Boris, and then all the rest of us, we do all the other bits with lots of different hats.
And was that intentional?
It was intentional. Again, it's about leading the audience through very, very complex history, and it's about going, okay, when we wrote the play, we were staging it in the UK, and we were going, how much can they take in, and at what speed? And so many of these names are going to be Eastern European. They're going to be unfamiliar to a British, London-based audience, for example. And so we went, we need to have an anchor point, and that anchor point is the king. And all of our shows thus far, so Bury the Hatchet and Call Me Fury, they all employ the same tool of multi-rolling, which is essentially when one actor takes on the parts of, like, a lot of different characters in the storytelling. But we do it in order to kind of add to theatricality of it, you know? So someone will just throw on a jacket and become another person. And again, it's that rough theater. It's that we didn't have more money to employ more people. But it's more fun this way. Like, if you want naturalism, watch a movie, you know? Because that's by design. One thing that I find very fascinating and exciting about theater, it's about this contract between the audience and the ensemble presenting the story. Like with a film, you know, you have the balance of the screen, you know, the director and the cinematographer have created the worldview for you, and you see nothing but what exists on your screen. But in a theater, you know, you could present a naturalistic play, right? And you could build the most realistic living room you've ever seen. But then, you know, the legs of the theater come in, the front of the theater comes in, and you look to your left and you look to your right and you go, oh no, but we're here. So what's this? There's a level of like uncanny valley to that, which I find quite unsatisfying. So I adore creating a theatrical environment where we go like, we're going to make you believe all of this is real because we're telling you this story and you're joining us on this journey, and you're part of the imaginative world that we're building. You have to believe it because we're making it together.
Yeah, you did an incredible job. So once again, to give you a little bit more kudos, it was whimsical, magical, musical, because it's a play and there's music and it's beautiful music. And it's funny and fun and also sad and depressing at times. And I don't know how you balance that so well. And one would think that having a cast of 5 jumping to different parts, it would be confusing, but it wasn't. It was like delineated. You knew who was playing who and how it was moving the story forward. You had a violin played the baby, you had a coat rack play Hitler, and you had I think also the coat rack playing a train car. I mean, it was absolutely incredible how you portrayed all of this. And as you said, the contract, we all believed it. It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the imagination. That's what I love. We've done it since we were kids. Like, we tell stories in community because we agreed to be in this relationship together, and I think that's really quite fun.
And so the other thing that I find interesting, because Boris is the protagonist, and I think he's telling the story from how he perceives himself. And again, talking about that this is not a simple story, I find it incredible how you do balance that in this play, because some people said you have to be very careful because you have to talk about the reality of this. It was a fascist government. There were Jews, almost 12,000 people, mostly Jews, I believe, who were murdered. And yet there's a country that stands by their Jewish citizens, their Jewish co-citizens who are together with them, which is remarkable. And someone asked, was there a partisan group? Were there anyone who fought against the regime? And it sounds like not only did Boris do that, but you had, like you said, citizens and Metropolitan Stefan and Cyril, who you even make this comment in the play, we'll jump over fences, we'll knock on doors, and we'll put our bodies on the tracks, and we will go with you wherever you're going. I mean, this was remarkable. So in a sense, it sounds like the country, they all took this upon themselves, the country.
Absolutely. And there were instances, and we try to show that in the section of the play where we sing Which Side Are You On? There were riots that were breaking out, basically, in protest. So, like, you see everyday Bulgarians standing up to this kind of governmental edict, you know, that this was widespread. It was, you know, well documented that people were not having it, basically.
Thank you. I just saw some of the comments I would like to address. The audience posted a few. For example, Jill posted 3 comments. Thank you. I'll just briefly comment on them. So in the first one, the comment says that my grandfather, although not deported, for which I'm grateful, was sent to a labor camp and his pharmacy was confiscated. This is another example of how controversial this period was. As I mentioned in my brief introduction, and then Sasha, there were anti-Semitic laws that were adopted by the parliament under the German influence. At the same time, many of the measures didn't meet any general sympathy from the population. So it's indeed controversial. One explanation for sending people to labor camp was that actually many non-Jewish Bulgarians also went to these labor camps to build infrastructure. And when Germany was pushing Bulgaria to finalize deportation, apparently one excuse was that we need people to build infrastructure. That's why we have the Jews working in the camps. If you recall from the Schindler's List, this famous movie of Spielberg, the Germans are questioning Spielberg why because he says he needs Jews to work on the factories to produce weaponry. And they're asking him, okay, but why do you need children? And I remember, if I remember it correctly, it was a long time ago, but he pretty much violently pulled kids, showed his little arm and said, when you need to polish a shell from inside, you need a very tiny arm to go in. So again, I was not there. I cannot speak authoritatively about that. But one explanation about the camps is that this was a way to justify not fulfilling the orders coming from Berlin. But of course, on personal and every other level, I sympathize with everyone who went to those camps. It was a war. It was a very, very miserable time. Then Gil is also referring to a Bulgarian relative who lost citizenship and couldn't get it back. And Gil is asking, is there any official policy to not to give citizenship to Bulgarian Jews? Definitely, as a Consul General, I could say this officially. It's absolutely the furthest possible from the situation. We do encourage everyone with Bulgarian origins to reclaim Bulgarian citizenship here in New York. Even though I'm not dealing with that directly as a Consul General, pretty much on a daily basis, we have people who, based on their ancestors, could claim Bulgarian citizenship. In the comments, it says that the authorities thought that the documentation was burned down. I don't know details, obviously, about that, but definitely I could assure you there is no policy for denying citizenship, particularly to Bulgarian Jews living in Israel or their children and grandchildren. Bulgaria developed very close relations with Israel after the end of the Cold War. Before that, it was stormy because we were, in a way, a satellite to the Soviet Union. So we pretty much followed the foreign policy directives of Moscow. But from the beginning of the 90s, we really strengthened our relations with Israel on many, many levels. Political, diplomatic, just to give an example, every September when the session of the UN General Assembly starts in New York, there are many traditional meetings between our president and leaders of the American Jewish community here. Our leadership many times per year goes to Israel even for cabinet discussions. I personally work with many American Jewish organizations here, and I've been to Israel. I was just a few days ago invited to go again. I was supposed to go in November, but because of the war situation, I couldn't. So hopefully in May, I'll make it. So definitely there is no such a policy, and we do encourage everybody with Bulgarian origins to reclaim their citizenship. And I see that Gergana commented on the question whether this is studied in Bulgarian history books. See, my experience as a child was that I didn't know anything. Apparently, she was told that, at least to some extent. I guess it was not centralized curriculum given by the Ministry of Education. Probably it was mostly about the interests of the teachers to share this with the children. But definitely until the 90s, I was not aware of that. Thank you.
Thanks for answering those questions. If anyone has any other questions or comments, you can please raise your virtual hand or unmute yourself if I don't see you. In the meantime, Sasha, if I can ask, how did you choose what would stay in or make the cut to be in the play, and what you might take out or not choose to include in the show?
Well, a lot of it really was trial and error. So the show has existed in a lot of different iterations since we first staged it in 2020. When we did it in 2020 at the Vault Festival, like I mentioned, it was a 55-minute version. So like there was a whole section in the middle that we basically narrated our way through. We didn't get to see the scenes in the same way that we got a chance to give time to, give space to when we were in 59 East 59th. It's an extremely complicated dramaturgical question. And I think the answer is, the rule was, what does this do to Boris, and how does this change his mind, and how does this progress his journey? And that was why we wound up not being able to include more of Dmitry Peshev's story, the man who was instrumental in organizing the delegates to go and try and get the deportation to be done, because to be cancelled, because we realized essentially what was happening was somebody was getting a piece of information, was telling that piece of information to somebody else, and telling that information to a third part. Do you know what I mean? So we just kind of went, okay, well, we can't do that. We can't, like, already most of the plot is centered around like whether or not we've signed a piece of paper. So like people can only take so much bureaucracy. We have to make it engaging. So at every crux, each scene had to be about what has Boris learned, how is this testing him on an emotional and like a moral level, and how does this bring us closer to him putting everything on the line and finally making the decision to stand up for himself and stand up because so it's called The Brief Life and Mysterious Death of Boris III. He lived till he was 47, I think, if my math is right, which isn't that brief. But the idea being that he only really comes into his own power in that moment when he stands up to Hitler, when he really goes like, I'm putting my 10 toes in the sand and I am standing up for my own convictions. I'm not going to fear anymore. I'm going to do the right thing. Of course, this is our theatrical interpretation, but yeah, it's all about how does our protagonist perceive this story, and how does that journey let the audience in to understand the history, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. And I think just taking into consideration that you're writing a play and it has to have this theatrical movement as well, it's very important.
We do have to take some liberties, but where and when we do, they're usually too, like, we don't make things up out of whole cloth, except for the fact that we sort of put Boris at a party that he couldn't have possibly have been in. But we say that he wasn't there in the play. We very much go like, yeah, he wasn't here, but enjoy, you know. We allied timelines and we allied characters. So perhaps something might have happened over a slightly longer length of time and we encapsulate it in one moment. Or perhaps maybe it was like 5 or 6 people that tried to do this thing and we create one character that does it. But it's about getting, I like to say it's about getting to the spiritual center of the history, you know?
Yes, and I love that scene when he's at the party, and you do mention everyone knows I wasn't really here, but it's so beautiful to watch this piece. I've had a number of people write. So someone just said that they just purchased the book or the script text, and a few people have asked, will it be shown in the U.S. again, or how will I see it? So maybe you can talk about that.
So currently, we are planning a European tour, and we are hoping to bring it to Bulgaria later in 2025, but that's very much still penciled. So plans are in motion, but no tickets are yet on sale. And we're hoping to make it back out again to America, but probably not at this rate until 2026.
So you have a couple of people who were part of the rescuers of the Bulgarian Jewish community. Can you speak to the righteous among the nations? Who was recognized, who wasn't recognized as being saviors of the Jewish people?
They're one of the people who I play in the story, and I wound up having this really kind of deeply moving experience. So I play Liliana Panica, who is one of the she is the secretary to Alexander Belev, who is the commissariat for the Jewish question. She was one of the people instrumental in getting information out of the commissariat to the Jewish resistance. So I play her, and there's, as far as I know, only one photograph of her that exists. And it was in my slideshow, and she's pictured with what looks like either like a polka dot button-down top, or maybe like a blazer or something. And my costume designer and we had this long conversation about costume and what we're going to be able to achieve. And basically, she was like, I can't find a 1940s cut blazer in polka dot, so I'm going to make you one. And so she did. She, found the right style of garment and then stitched the polka dot onto that garment. And this one Bulgarian lady met me outside the theater in tears, and she grabbed my hand and she went, the second you came out in that jacket, I knew who you were going to be. And I was so, like, I just burst out into floods of tears, because this woman, Liliana Panica, who was 27 when these events were happening, risked everything and put her life on the line to do what she believed in, and ultimately, like, she died. I mean, she died, doing what she thought was the right thing to do. And now all that survives is this one photograph and these polka dots, and it just became this really profound thing where it was like, this was a young woman who thought that was a beautiful garment to wear, and she was also a hero. And it was just like such a lovely thing that an audience member was like, I knew who that would be because of one photograph. And so, like, I hope that specificity speaks to, we're trying to take what is a very small story and make it recognizable, so that the people who really made an impact and the people who put their lives on the line are remembered in some way that, is reaches through time, basically.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I don't think Lillian was recognized as righteous among the nations. So for you to give her that recognition in your show is incredible, because it sounds like you said, and as history shows, she put her life on the line and did not get the credit for it at the time. And I think she was beat when she was arrested. She was beaten and then died from her wounds shortly after. So she lived a short life, and there may have been only 4 or 5 Bulgarians who were, as far as I know, recognized as righteous among the nations. And speaking of which, you do such an incredible job speaking about giving her respecting the Jewish story in your play, that when I met you, I thought you were Jewish. And you were like, oh, no, I'm not. So I have to thank you for putting together such a beautiful play and incorporating the Jewish story in such a beautiful way, and honor and respect. And I was wondering also how you did that. The music was beautiful. So how that all got so beautifully put into your play.
Thank you. And I have to give so much credit to our director, Hannah Howard King, who is Jewish, who's a great dear friend of mine from Georgetown University. Our stage manager, Zoe McKinnon, is also Jewish. We've, at every juncture, at each level of development, have tried to make sure that we have Jewish creatives in the room that are feeding back and making sure that, because of course the story is really personal to me as a Bulgarian, but to make sure that we are being sensitive where it needs to be and being accurate where we need to be. So throughout the entire process, we've had Jewish creatives who have been invaluable. And Hannah's the reason why we've been able to incorporate Shalom Aleichem and Avinu Malkeinu as some of the music in the show. So yeah, I'm deeply, deeply indebted, and it really touched to be part of that storytelling process.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that this has been such a beautiful program. Thank you both so much, Sasha, for your talent, your kindness, just everything, what you put on stage and what you shared today, all the research that you've done to make this like a living monument in a sense. I mean, it's truly, and I hope more people can see it. That's my wish. Dr. Angelov, you are incredible. Your kindness and such respect and wisdom. I so appreciate you being here and sharing. And when I met you, you were so kind to speak to this person. You had no idea who he was, but you gave me such respect and your time and everything. So I thank you so much and for being here. I want to give you both the last word. If there's anything that you can leave us with that you want to share with us, and then we'll wrap up the evening. But again, I just want to say thank you to both of you, and thank you to everyone who spent the time here with us today. But Sasha and Dr. Angelov, please, I'd love to hear from you.
I guess what I would, yeah, it's been a very tumultuous time. I think for me, it's been a very complicated time, living away from my home country and watching things unfold and feeling like we're about to embark on, yeah, a journey. And one of the things that strikes me about this story that I want to remember and I want to take into how I approach the next couple of years is that ultimately it's about love. And it's about looking after each other, and it's about loving your community and standing up for the people who you care about. And it's about the small things actually making a big difference. And if you can do that on like this level, hopefully it trickles up,
Thank you. A few words from me. Just some comments. A comment I wanted to make when Sasha was telling about that even though the whole Jewish community in Bulgaria survived after the war, the greatest majority of them left. There could be different reasons indeed. Just building on what you said, one reason is that the Jewish community saw the writing on the wall, if I could use another idiom. They very clearly saw what happens, that the communists, the Soviets install a communist regime, and the communist regime is not really supporting private initiative, private business, and many of the Bulgarian Jewish population at the time were small business owners. So on one hand, they very well realized that for them, the life will be very different. So that was one thing. Some of them stayed. Some of them even integrated into the ruling elite. But the majority of them left. One reason, as Sasha said, was the painful experience. Another one was the coming communist dictatorship. And the third huge reason was that for the first time in millennia, there was a Jewish state that was created. And even though, I don't know to what extent they realize how hard it will be initially and how much they have to invest and build to have the strong Jewish state nowadays we have, I believe many of the Bulgarian Jews left following this dream next year in Jerusalem. So I guess that's really important just to add. And again, thank you to both of you for giving me the opportunity to speak and to tell the story, because I've been invited to different events, including recently, the last 2 years, by the New York City Bar, speaking about anti-Semitism. And of course, as a Bulgarian diplomat, I would like to show what Bulgaria did. That's part of my job. But it's also very important as a way to inspire people particularly about the civil mobilization. As Sasha was telling, people heard that something is going on. They got together to discuss. Some of them got scared, but the rest pushed on. They found the right person, Dmitry Peshev, the deputy speaker of parliament, who assumed this huge risk for himself to push further. So this is an inspiration that what we say here, if you see something, say something. To be aware and to mobilize the society when needed. Because if we just close our eyes, things will get worse. Thank you.
Thank you again, Sasha Wilson, Dr. Angelov, and to everyone here spending your time with us. I very much appreciate it. I want to wish everyone a good night, and thank you so much for being here. Be well.